Welcome to Creative in Tech, a podcast show powered by ReadSpeaker.ai. I'm your host, Carrie Roberts, and I'm the brand evangelist for North America at ReadSpeaker. This show is all about showcasing and highlighting the brands and organizations that are creatively using one of the fastest growing spaces in technology, conversational AI. And in the next few conversations, we're going to be chatting with people in the banking and finance space about how they are creatively using this type of technology to help grow, innovate, and improve their customer strategy and internal operations. Joining me today is Todd Robinson. He is the head of strategic accounts and accounting channel at Vic.ai. Welcome, Todd. Thank you for joining.
Carrie, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today. Appreciate it.
Yes, and I wanted to bring you on this show. You have a slightly different angle here, but I think it's relevant to the conversation as a whole. You focus on the accounting space as well as just AI in general. But before we get into that, I'd love to hear a little bit about what excites you about the AI space in general.
I think where the technology's taken us, it clearly sits at the top of the technology spectrum. I've been in the accounting profession for almost the past 20 years. I've worked for a number of different vendors, technology vendors in this space, from the back in the days, and not to date myself, when we'd actually ship software, to transitioning to cloud-based SaaS applications and that sort of thing. And so I've seen where automation has helped take the profession. And I could certainly see how AI is going to continue to, push the technology envelope and where it's going to take us here in this new decade that we're in. So it's an exciting time, especially in the accounting profession, to be, or to have joined a company that's kind of, in my mind, helping to pioneer that. So yeah, exciting times ahead for sure.
Definitely. I was doing my research before we started, and I was reading that there are about 138,000 accounting firms in the United States. And that's not including, obviously, accounting within an organization or these kind of smaller players as well. Can you talk a little bit about just the overall space of accounting? Where is it at now in terms of technology, and where do you see it going?
Great question. The funny thing about it is, in the accounting profession, we're always pushing the digital transformation envelope, right?
Yes.
But the accounting profession is also a very traditional one, and it's like trying to turn a cruise ship around. It takes a very long time to do that. And accounting firms tend to always want to operate in the traditional ways of doing things. And a good example would be trying to, do away with the billable hour and replace timesheets with more value-based kind of billing methodologies and that sort of thing. And that, there's a lot of theories around that. The same for technology. And there's this stigma about the Sally, same as last year mentality, and just always continuing to do things in a traditional way. And again, kind of like what I refer to as last decade's automations, tools, I'll just put that in quotes, right? Especially in the accounting profession, it's been heavily rules-based. You could kind of build a rule to get applied to a particular transaction and how you want that transaction to be treated. But those rules break down, and then OCR technology came along, and that helped, capture some of that data and provide some automation. And then RPA and bots kind of came into it. And now AI is kind of pioneering a whole new evolution as part of that digital transformation, where I see it taking the profession. But at the end of the day, we're still a traditional profession, and it's like trying to turn that cruise ship around. But that's what I find to be the most exciting part of it, and helping to evangelize this new technology and where it could potentially take us.
Yeah, and you have a couple things that you had mentioned on your site, and one of them was that, and this says for accountants, but I think this is really for anyone. But it says accountants, their cognitive abilities drop significantly after only 30 minutes of performing repetitive tasks. And I know that's for myself too, and I'm not in accounting. So I think anytime we start to do that, it's just like it can be very mentally draining. And so that's kind of where AI comes in a little bit. Can you speak to that and also talk about the difference between something that's automated versus autonomous?
Yeah, so the first part, the cognitive part of it, anytime there's redundancy, right, in my mind, you're going to get bored at some point in time with that, right? And especially for what Vic.ai solves for, we're a pre-accounting transactional AI solution. So to kind of break this down to some common sense and more from a personal banking perspective, we get invoices in the mail every month, right? And I could equate this to like my PS&E utility bill. That's an invoice. That's got to get, in essence, inputted or coded into the general ledger application in order for me to pay my vendor, sort of thing. And traditionally speaking, it's always been a very manual, laborious part of the process. So you can imagine for accounting firms, for accountants or bookkeepers that have hundreds, if not thousands of clients, and they're providing some monthly bookkeeping services and processing hundreds, if not thousands of invoices, right? The cognitive part is that if I'm going to continue to do that very traditionally, and manually, it's very time consuming. It opens up the opportunity for human error. Think about it, right? Like if I incorrectly put in the wrong dollar amount to pay that vendor and an extra zero, that's a pretty costly mistake, right? So, and frankly, nobody wants to do that type of work anymore, and so there's some change management. There's a pivot here to be able to leverage the AI to help assist with that. And so hopefully that answers the first part of that question, right? The second part, regarding the automation to the autonomous side of it, a good example would be like an autopilot feature of ours, very similar like to the Tesla autopilot. Can now drive the car. There's some human assistance there, right? You shouldn't sit behind that driver's seat and put autopilot or engage autopilot. Autopilot for us is the autonomous side of what we're solving for, and really taking that invoice from first hitting the AI, our Vic.ai platform, the AI coding and ingesting it at 95% accuracy or greater, to the point where it requires no human intervention at all whatsoever, and we could sync that right over to the general ledger application from there. So the autonomous side of it is really removing the human component altogether and automating that 100%. And we're seeing that across certain clients, vendors that we're servicing, and so it's also kind of the holy grail of what we're solving for, right? Of what an AI or machine learning application is technically trying to solve for, is no human intervention at all whatsoever. Now, I'll just add to that too, Carrie. There's a lot of education around this, right? And there's that false misperception that AI is going to eliminate jobs. And I could tell you in the accounting profession, probably same for the banking and the finance industry as well, that's just not the case. We come from a very compliant, quality control driven industry. And there's just some change management here to leverage the AI to do that upfront heavy lifting, the cognitive part, right? Where humans are going to come in and review and validate and maybe approve those invoices or those type of transactions to eventually get processed. So there's always going to be a human component there, but we have the ability now to automate 100% of it. That's the autonomous intelligence side of it. So a little bit long-winded response, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, it does. And that's something we hear all the time in all sorts of various AI, that this idea that it's replacing people and people are worried. And, this comes around constantly throughout time. But one of the things that you talk about, and we talk about really in any industry, is that it's not about necessarily replacing the entire human. It's about replacing those repetitive, boring, monotonous tasks so
Right.
that you can be, as you guys say, a strategic advisor. Can you talk a little bit about how this kind of allows accountants or accounting firms to really focus on what they do best, rather than kind of this minutia stuff that's important, but doesn't need to be taking maybe their brain power in the same way?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the number one trend in the accounting industry right now, as far as the services that are being provided, that's become probably one of the more profitable divisions, is the advisory side. Okay, it used to be and it still is a heavily tax and audit and assurance, consulting business, but the advisory side, and this is the outsourced bookkeeping side. Is becoming more profitable, and it's becoming more profitable because it's more automated now, more than it ever has been, right? And by leveraging the technology to help automate that more, to reduce the amount of time that it would take to complete those monotonous tasks that you're referring to, is the time that we're able to give back to those accountants and bookkeepers to become better advisors to their clients. So now it's a matter of, well, what are you going to advise them on? Okay, well, maybe you could strategically advise them on their financials to help them better run their business, to maybe help make investment decisions. Or, have you thought about expanding your business in this way? And so it's providing them with better insights and analytics around all that financial data. And if they're too busy stuck doing heads down data entry, the pre-accounting side of it, the monotonous, boring side of it, one, they're probably overpaying their people to do that kind of work. And second, it's not allowing them to provide the most valued revenue generating service to their clients. So there's a certain benefit to it for sure.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. Like I said, this goes kind of across all verticals, but we are obviously focusing on this one for today. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some use cases that Vic.ai has done within this accounting space, what they were trying to accomplish, what the AI has done and how it has helped them, and maybe share some data from it as well?
Yeah, so a couple of use cases. One would be specific to the accounting firms that we're working with. And we work with what's called their CAS groups, their Client Accounting and Advisory Services Group, where they're providing outsourced bookkeeping services to their clients. So they're going out to their clients, they're selling a service to take over all of their monthly bookkeeping needs and bring that in-house. So they, in essence, become an external controller, bookkeeper, CFO for that business, and now the firm is processing all those transactions. So the firms would be leveraging Vic AI behind the scenes, kind of back office. Our intellectual property would become theirs. It would allow them and their people to become more automated and more efficient, right? And again, in a lot of cases, it's again been a very traditional part of the process, and it's just taken up too much of that upfront part of the time to do all that work. So it's giving them time back in the day, to provide more higher valued services and that sort of thing. And so, we're helping firms process hundreds, if not thousands, of invoices on a monthly basis on behalf of their clients now, and that's allowing them to operate more efficiently. That's also allowing them to grow and scale that business model of theirs without having to hire more people to do more work, right? There's only two ways to expand. You either have to hire more people to take on more work, or you need to partner with the right technology that could support you and your existing resources. So that's how we're specifically helping accounting firms, and we have a lot of accounting firms of ours who are benefiting from that. A more specific use case relative to an enterprise corporation, a real estate entity of ours, was processing about 1.2 million invoices a year. So about 100,000 invoices a month. It was taking them on average 6 to 10 minutes to capture and code that data manually, right? We've been able to reduce that down to about 1 minute's worth of time. So you can imagine the time savings, you can imagine the overhead cost of having to manually do all that and replacing it with an AI technology of ours, and what that return on investment would look like for that particular use case. It also gives you a good idea of what our scalability is like, and the fact that we're processing millions of invoices on a monthly basis on behalf of all of our clients. And so those are a couple of good use case examples. But that's the ROI, taking what is typically on average a 10-minute manual process, leveraging the AI technology and making that autonomous down to like 1 minute's worth of time. And we're going to solve that for all types of pre-accounting transactions, not just invoices, but credit card and bank statement processing is coming in the near future. And we're going to continue to expand our AI platform from there.
Yeah, and you made some good points here where you talked about, the only way to really expand your business is to either hire more people or find some sort of technology that allows you to scale. I think that's an important point. We always hear about ROI, especially when things seem new or different. People are, what's the ROI of this? And I think you laid that out really well. Like, this is a way to actually scale, to grow, and it's going to be cheaper in some ways and actually help you move faster. And one thing that tends to happen, I think, I'm not an accountant, but I know my accountant has said this to me before. People sometimes are last minute with their invoices, or it's like a mess. And it's like so much stuff. But then that person also wants their information very quickly. Without using kind of AI technology, that could take an individual by hand manually, maybe a week or so. And that can be frustrating to the customer. Can you talk a little bit about, how this is not only saving time, but how this kind of helps the customer, especially if maybe they are maybe a more less organized person, but still want the immediacy from an accountant?
Cash flow is king, right? You can't get to cash flow. You can't get to that true financial snapshot if all the pre-accounting type transactions haven't been processed yet. And if somebody's sitting there with a stack of invoices waiting to send that to their accountant or bookkeeper at the end of the month, then they're going to be running 60 to 90 days past due in regards to their financial situation. And that's just a horrible way to run a business. So part of this is also backing up a little bit prior to getting to the technology and just changing some traditional processes, or this is the way I've always done it. Well, as soon as you get that invoice, or why don't you go back to your vendor and instruct your vendor to send that invoice directly to Vic.ai electronically, and so we're receiving it the day the vendor produced it. We're processing it within a minute's worth of time. The human goes in, reviews it, maybe approves it. We sync it over to the general ledger, and that invoice is now ready to be paid. Whether they want to pay it or they want to wait until the terms of the invoice to pay, it's totally up to them, but it's been processed. And more importantly, it's been captured in the general ledger. So it gives them the ability to get a truer financial snapshot of how their business is operating on a daily basis. That's the true benefit of all this in my mind. It's the real-time benefit of where the AI technology is taking us, and this is specifically what we're solving for. I'm seeing it with other AI applications in the profession that are benefiting it just as equally.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, one of the other things that you guys do really well is you talk about the ability for the AI to recognize the difference, for example, for an invoice from Apple Inc., which sells computers, to recognize that as technology and not fruit. And that's actually something that's very similar to conversational AI in what we call NLU and NLP, where if somebody types in or speaks a certain word and they say Apple, they would notice the difference based on what they normally use. It starts to learn what is the difference, what should this go to. And I think that's a really important piece that, people should understand about the AI, that it is learning and it is smart and it is something that, yes, humans have to initially do on the back end, but once it's in that software and in that process or design, how helpful and how easy that can be, correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a lot. I think this is another false misperception is like, what is the AI actually doing for me? And how does the AI actually work? I mean, there's the Hollywood portrayal of it. And, from the Terminator and Skynet to Tony Stark and Jarvis and, and how we use AI in our everyday lives, unbeknownst to us,
Yeah.
right? And so there's clearly the educational component around it, but then there's the curiosity of, well, how is it actually capturing and coding that to the right GL account, and how it knew Apple was a tech vendor and not produce, a fruit. And so there's actually a lot that goes into the algorithms related to what the AI is capable of actually coding and ingesting, right? Then there's also other things like AI mapping and modeling, and also the AI having the ability to look at the historical data, which is where the machine learning gets applied. So then a platform like ours can become smarter and more automated for the client over a longer period of time. The more invoices that we're ingesting, the smarter our platform is getting. The likelihood of us recognizing that vendor, to your point, is greater now, and that's really what a true AI platform, especially like ours, is solving for. So it's a great question, but there's still a lot of education that needs to go in around it.
Yes, there's a lot of process that goes in the back end. And, we are talking a lot about conversational AI on this show, and yours doesn't directly do that at this point, but When you think of how conversational AI, and we speak about, chatbots or voice technology or the ability to speak and have something speak back to you, do you see that as part of just the accounting space, the financial space in general? Any thoughts on that personally?
I do see a need for it, I can't look in the crystal ball and kind of predict when there might be that need for it, but I could certainly see the benefit from like a virtual financial assistant perspective, right? I could certainly see a benefit of conversational AI to maybe even help support us from a customer service and support approach in providing some a human-like touch or feel there. I do know that Intuit, in the QuickBooks world, is continuing to play around with conversational AI related to like a virtual financial assistant to be able to advise their small business clients on financial needs of their business, right? So there's the analytics, there's the intelligence side, kind of getting back to your autonomous question earlier, and even for Vic, on the analytics side of what we're doing, and being able to tell maybe have a conversational AI technology be able to share the analytics of what our AI is doing, right? From a user perspective, I could think of an example like, right, maybe a user of mine, I would want to know, well, is this particular user becoming more efficient? Like, how much time is it taking them to process an invoice beyond what the AI had already done for them? So I could see a benefit of some conversational AI there to help provide that human-like interaction and feedback of some of those statistics and that sort of thing. So but again, we're a traditional profession, and just seeing AI trickle into it now and helping to pioneer that is a good first step. Conversational AI, in my mind, would be a good next logical step as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, like you said, there's kind of the element of like it could help with customer service, it could help with analytics, it could help with just marketing, just knowledge of asking questions, and even having the ability to say, hey, what was my invoice for Apple from May 25th? And then for it to speak back to you. And so kind of having these kind of options as we grow. But it is like you said, it's educating the space. It's getting people to not be afraid of it, to understand it, and to also realize that there are people that, they are experts in that area and they can help you. So you don't have to feel completely lost as a whole. When you think of the accounting space and everything we're talking about, if you could give kind of like one tip about AI in the accounting space, what would it be?
Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it rather sooner than later. I mean, especially this new decade, and especially coming out of this pandemic, everything's been accelerated by this pandemic. Cloud adoption has been accelerated by 4 to 5 years. AI machine learning platforms like ours have been accelerated by 4 to 5 years because of this pandemic. So you're going to have to learn more about it. You're going to have to adopt it. You're going to have to embrace it. So the first question that I would pose back to the audience would be, do you have an AI strategy in mind? It doesn't have to be relative to the accounting industry. It could be relative to your profession and what you do. But ask yourself, do you have an AI strategy in mind? And then secondly, what is that AI going to solve for me? Right now, AI is really kind of just solving for a particular process or a task, right? It's not Skynet, again, the Hollywood portrayal of it. AI can't do, there isn't one AI solution out there that's all encompassing that could solve all of our needs. That's just not a reality. Maybe someday in my lifetime, maybe, but that's just not the case. So you have to ask yourself, what is an AI strategy going to look like? And then what is that AI going to solve for me? You might need multiple AI solutions to get to where you want to go. But the benefit is the automation of all of it, like we've already discussed. And so that would be my suggestion. And don't be afraid of it, because again, we're already using it in our everyday lives, unbeknownst to us. We might as well use it in our profession and benefit from it, right?
Yes, I agree. If people want to learn more about anything we talked about today, where is the best place to get more information?
Certainly, you could connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to take any emails at todd.robinson@Vic.ai. You could certainly go out to Vic.ai as well and learn more about us that way and connect with us that way as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Todd, for sharing your insight on the accounting space and how you're using AI. We greatly appreciate it.
Carrie, thank you again for having me on the show. Really appreciate it.
And if you are watching or listening, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube page to catch all of the live videos at ReadSpeaker AI, as well as our audio version of the podcast at Creative in Tech, wherever you listen to podcasts.